Welcome to the Continuing Education module, Growing Importance of Wellness to Employers, Key Issues and the Future Importance of Wellness. Our agenda for this module includes the following topics: a working definition of wellness, understanding employer realities, key developing trends, important wildcards, rethinking wellness and well-being, and a summary of main points. A working definition of wellness is as follows. An intentional choice of a lifestyle, so there's intention and a lifestyle with its many different facets, characterized by personal responsibility, that's my role as an individual in my own health and well-being, moderation or avoidance of extremes, and maximum personal enhancement of physical, mental, and financial health. I can expand that definition to include other dimensions, things like intellectual development or cultural or social, but this particular approach is suggested as a starting point for wellness. Worksite Wellness Program as an organized program in the worksite that's intended to assist employees and their family members in making voluntary behavior changes that reduce their health and injury risk, improve their health consumer skills, and enhance their individual wellness, productivity, and well-being. So these are the context for our definition of wellness and a worksite wellness program for this particular module. Understanding employer realities. First of all, there's a great deal of uncertainty around the post-election changes that are going to affect the Affordable Care Act. There's the economic malaise and the issue of whether our markets and our orientation to commerce and global commerce is in fact going to change. There's the issue of increased global competition for various markets and sectors of our markets. There's substantial use of technology and the growth of technology from the employer's point of view. There's a shift away from manufacturing, and we may go back into manufacturing, but probably not anywhere near what we have done in previous decades in terms of American manufacturing. There's diversification of the workforce, so we have both cultural, age, generational diversification. We have aging of the workforce and a bipolar distribution of increasingly older employees along with more younger employees. We have the end of paternalism as we have known it over the last 4 to 6 decades in the American worksite. Need for increased productivity, the less able to absorb higher healthcare costs. So we've gone through a period of time where we've had a 4 to 6% plateauing, which is still 2 to 3 times the growth in our consumer price index and the inflationary pressures in our economy, which has left employers less able to absorb high healthcare costs post-ACA. Strong entitlement expectations, particularly among millennials in our workforce, fast pace of change, and some significant generational challenges in terms of expectations and motivational aspects about the worksite. So these, I would suggest to you, are the realities of what employers are in fact facing as we think about the role that wellness might play in being able to address these issues. Now, if we look at all U.S. business in the year 2015, the after-tax profitability of all U.S. corporations was reported at $5.95 trillion. The healthcare costs that those employers paid for was totaled at $1.58 trillion. And the issues are that for businesses to generate more after-tax profit dollars, which is this particular $5.95 trillion, for each dollar of profitability, we usually have to produce somewhere in the area of $4 to about $20 of sales. So the effort that we have to engage in as a business entity to generate more sales and generate more profits is fairly pronounced and fairly significant. From a healthcare cost standpoint, if we can affect even the dollars of spend in our health plan, or the ways in which we are paying premiums for disability insurance, workers' comp, and or presenteeism related expenses, we can in fact have a fairly significant impact on the profitability of organizations. So we do have an opportunity to be able to shift and create, instead of costs we're paying for health, actually derive those dollars as after-tax profitability. Now, the global relationship of health risk to health cost is captured by this World Economic Forum diagram. It shows you the 8 risks and behaviors that are around the circle. It shows you the 15 chronic conditions that are listed from 1 to 15, and they account for approximately 80% of the total costs of all chronic illness worldwide. In the US, it's estimated that chronic conditions and chronic illness accounts for about 70 to 75% of all healthcare spending. So of the $3.2 trillion spent on healthcare in 2015, it basically means that about 70 to 75% of that is related to chronic illness. And these areas account for 80% of that. So it comes back to our ability to work on the risk and behaviors that you see in the circle as being an important part of what wellness is going to need to do in terms of work sites and working populations. One of the other issues that's driving the importance of wellness is the percent higher cost of key health risk factors. And this is what would be called severity data in an epidemiologic sense. And it's just dealing with the increased cost that's associated with specific risk factors in our population, many of which are deteriorating and having higher results from the analysis of the relationship between health risk and health cost. Another issue that's involved is the prevalence. So you can see some of the increasing prevalence of specific risk factors, again reported in this newer updated HERO data. An actuarial study that was done and published in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine in 2012 looked at the percent of total medical care expenses potentially preventable given at that time what was current in terms of the types of program interventions. And this basically shows you that there's a fairly significant, it's about 18% reduction. This relates back to our comment on the increased profitability of organizations where we can in fact help employees to be more healthy. That has a very efficient impact on increased profitability of organizations. In addition, we have the dose-related response phenomena showing up in the percent of potentially preventable cost from the 15 to 44 age group, the 45 to 59, the 60 to 64, and then retirees at 28%, and then all around 20%. So there's some significant ability for us to reduce that $3.2 trillion expenditure in 2015 as we look at the increase over time and the effects of our ability to help the population reduce risk factor prevalence and severity. Now, the financial impact of selected risk factors is portrayed here, and it shows you medical costs, sick leave cost, and presenteeism cost. So this shows you those health risk factors that we were looking at just a moment ago in terms of increased prevalence, and the idea that the total of these costs, when we add all three together, does in fact shift the importance and the general positioning of various of these risk factors. This reaffirms our ability to affect the economics of health for the average employer. Now, there are different ways of doing wellness, so we need to recognize that if we are going to reduce some of these economic variables and make real health improvements in the populations we're working with, then we have to be using a model or a strategy of wellness that is very likely to have major impact. And that tends to be the results-driven wellness model rather than the feel-good model or the traditional model. An authoritative meta-analysis was published by Catherine Backer, David Cutler, and Ziru Song. And they found, in looking at 22 studies of health care costs and 22 studies of sick leave absenteeism cost, that the medical costs fall by about $3.27 for each dollar spent on wellness, and that absenteeism costs fall by some $2.73 for each dollar spent. So therefore, the ability for us to look at more advanced meta-analysis using statistical methods to look at multi-populations and multi-studies, and then to combine their populations and test out hypotheses and assumptions, basically shows that we have up to 6 to 1, or about 600% potential return on investment with the reported literature. Most of this literature is over the decades of the 80s, 90s, and the first decade of the 21st century. There are some important wildcards for us to keep in mind. First of all, there's the uncertainty of the new structure of ACA, how that more market-oriented solutions approach to healthcare reform will in fact work. We also have increased reliance on technology. So technology is changing the context of our health benefit usage and health and health-related issues over time. We still have a considerable problem with health literacy and health care literacy, which will continue to also affect our populations. There's more virtual work going on, so we have less reliance on a geographic location for that work, but more ability to work from home or from the road or from various other settings. We have the boomers that are aging. We have a bipolar aging pattern in terms of intensification of age amongst the older population, and a lessening of age, a lowering of average age for the younger population. So we are going to see some changes in the demographics of our workforce setting, which then puts some real challenge into how we address the wellness issues of the aging individual and the very young individual on the other end. We have generational differences in work attitudes, in what motivates people, what provides value to people, how people are used to communicating, their expectations for how work is carried out, and what their role and contributions are. So we have some significant generational differences that are wild cards when it comes to wellness. There is more economic instability, at least for the relatively short term. We're seeing more potential to have major players in the global economy changing their role and position and size, particularly around the EU and the relationship with Asian economies between the United States and other major players. We also have risk factors increasing. So among various portions of our population, we are likely to see changes with the cannabis legislation and changes around the role of cannabis in people's lives in the U.S., as well as issues around some of the newer risk factors like distracted driving and screen time and screen effects on individuals and children over time. So we have some risk factors that are increasing, some of the traditional ones as well as some newer ones. And we also have the issue of how and where the human capital related perspective will be exercised. So it has to do with whether organizations and individuals that are in positions of authority and power do in fact see human capital enhancement as a major goal, and whether that in fact will shape and affect how we approach wellness in the decades ahead. The summary of why wellness is important for employers: the return on investment is one portion of that, and it involves improving employee health in measurable ways, reducing sick leave, reducing the use of health benefits, reducing the workers' compensation in the severity and frequency of injuries and illness, reducing disability-related costs, short-term and long-term, reducing presenteeism costs, and increasing the units of production where our production is in fact very standardized units of activity. When it comes to the value on investment, the ability for our wellness programs to improve employee morale, increase employee loyalty, reduce organizational conflict, increase productivity, improve employee decision making. and to improve employee recruitment and retention. So these are the areas that we generally look at as value on investment. When we're doing both the return on investment and value on investment, we are essentially using a balanced scorecard approach toward looking at the value of wellness and its importance for employers. Now, the repeal of the ACA and the modifications that are likely to take place bring about some level of uncertainty of future cost trends. That uncertainty is usually not something that employers like to experience or are positively declined toward. At the same time, we have complexity of the impact of employer incentives on the issue of how healthcare costs are managed and how individuals utilize the coverage that they have. There's also the effectiveness of non-market solutions. I personally believe that non-market solutions are not very good approaches to healthcare, and that as we move perhaps back toward more market-based solutions, that our long-term stabilization of costs will in fact be greater. We also have increased coverage and subsidy effects that are occurring because of the legacy nature of the ACA and the coverage that was provided to fairly large groups of people in the population. We have the issue of the prevention funding that was originally built into the ACA, not likely to be carried forward and also not likely to be funded. So the ability for us to have and not have the resources that could in fact go through things like Title IV spending under the ACA are in fact things that are going to adversely impact the amount of prevention that our population experiences. And I think we can expect more changes ahead as the political process works its way through and we end up with changes affecting the ACA and the reform related ways in which we are attempting to stabilize and bring under control the healthcare costs for our employers and others in our population. I think part of this leads to rethinking wellness and well-being, and some of the suggestions I have for rethinking these things is I think we want to encourage the making of a strategic choice to do wellness. I think we need to be more results-driven oriented in our wellness model and strategy. I think that we need to have some much more careful look and selection of targets and targeting of wellness programs. I think we have to address all of the economic variables, all 5, including health plan costs, sick leave absenteeism, workers' compensation, disability insurance, short and long term, and presenteeism experience and losses. So I believe that we need to address all of those economic variables. I think we need to combine interventions and streamline the process, moving much of wellness to a stronger intrinsic base, but also a very personalized base, using our smartphone technology and SMS texting to be able to interact with people, to provide them offers that they in fact then have an opportunity to take and to utilize to work on their own wellness and well-being. I think we need to be using a risk stratification approach with populations to get to the most effective and cost-effective ways of working on specific behavior issues for populations. That smartphone-based DRIP well-being survey. So we break down the HRA into smaller bite-sized pieces, use a smartphone-based platform to do that. And the personalized offers need to be a combination of low-cost or no-cost items along with more of the traditional items we have essentially put into wellness programs. And I think we need to link that to a significant premium reduction with wellness incentives. So the ability for us to build wellness into our open enrollment season, to be able to have it connect with a lower health plan cost, and to engage with 80+% of our employee populations, and to work programs from an extrinsic base of motivation to intrinsic is where the future lies in terms of rethinking wellness and well-being. Our summary of key points for this particular module are that many worksite wellness programs languish due to ignorance. I believe a lot of them have pursued a vendorization where they've essentially given the program over to the vendor and have not maintained much of a sense of ownership or involvement in the programs. And I believe that they've also capped their expenditures and essentially plateaued their efforts in many respects. So that languishing of programs, I think, is due to their ignorance of what they're involved in or can be involved in. There are a number of major realities and undercurrents that are influencing business leaders, many of which we have just gone through in terms of the 2016 election cycle. Virtually all the trends affecting employers are making wellness more important for employers. And one of the most important perspectives is to look at the full economic rationale for wellness. And that's where we talked about the 5 different economic variables. Another important choice is to select the right program model that matches your desire to see either ROI or VOI increased or enhanced by your wellness efforts. And wellness needs to be approached as a strategic business concern, not just a tactical concern. So the movement away from vendorization, kind of employers taking back more of the responsibility for the programs, shifting from a tactical view to a strategic view, and then addressing a broader range of economic variables and a broader range of behavioral targets. There are a number of economic variables that can create a significant competitive advantage for employers that do results-driven wellness. And the bottom line issues are reducing current or future employee benefit costs and are getting more work productivity from present employees. I think those 2 areas are going to be the most significant long-term areas for wellness to be working on, which is reducing the cost of the labor and reducing the numbers of people that need to be working because we've enhanced their productivity and their functional capability. I believe that summarizes this particular module. Now let's deal with some key questions. The first question is, in general, do most business leaders understand the potential of worksite wellness? And I would say no. I think most business leaders have very little comprehension for the 5 economic variables that are driven and affected by worksite wellness. And I think they see wellness as a tactical rather than strategic pursuit. And I think the vast majority of them are stuck in this plateau of tactical consideration and vendorization of programs. I don't think that there also is much of a human capital enhancement orientation in our current business leaders. So unless those things are addressed and modified, I don't see current business leaders, a lot of them, moving in a very active way toward a strategic approach to wellness. Secondly, our second question is, how would you make the strategic case for wellness to employees? And I think what I would do is I would show the normal situation, how people drift from low risk to moderate risk to high risk, and the consequences and implications of that to their long-term health and well-being. I think it involves identifying major health threats, and particularly those that are secondary to our newer developments and technology issues. I think it also involves projecting the health and benefit realities of what retirement and length of work and working life is likely to be, and the unfunded liabilities of programs like Medicare at $34 trillion to the year 2030, and our ability to show retirement effects and benefit effects related to some of these underlying issues of health. And then to define also quality of life, of work life and quality of life and well-being in a way in which employees can relate to it. And then essentially putting that case to them and being able to then ask for and appeal for their involvement in wellness activities. I think the third question is, how would you make the strategic case for wellness to senior managers? And I think what I would do is to portray each of these 5 different economic variables and what is likely to happen ahead I'd project ahead using a 5-year time frame, and then I would compare that with after-tax profitability or net revenues for public sector and nonprofit organizations. So that's the way that I would suggest that we get and present the strategic case for wellness to senior managers in both profit making and public sector employment. Now that you completed this module, go ahead and take the quiz.